we've seen previously that there were several skills to develop your critical thinking skills. We talked about acknowledging politics, so the idea that there were always something political even behind what appeared to be the most neutral techniques. And we talked about lifting the veil of rhetoric, so the idea that any presentation, any speech is always saying more and saying less than what is actually in the word. So we talked about that. A third skill that is absolutely key for that, and that I want to come back to quickly here, is the idea of considering multiple perspectives. What is going to differentiate a critical thinker from someone who's just criticizing is that criticizing is so often single-minded. It's from one perspective, one ideology, one position, and going against another that is considered to be dominant or something like that. Critical thinking is about being able to consider perspectives that are very different, and any kind of critical issue, any kind of complex situation has several ways of seeing it. We often caricature it as, are you for or against, pros and cons, black and white, left and right, tall and small, etc., etc. So we tend to polarize the analysis, but actually it's not that there's one or the other. There's one and the other, and multiple different perspectives when it comes to almost any given situation. So thinking critically means that you are trying to consider these multiple perspectives. I'll come back to it. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with it, but it's going to enrich your point of view. This was very much an idea that you found in a book that was written after the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. The Carnegie Foundation in the US commissioned a report to understand how business education might have contributed to the financial crisis, because most of the actors involved had contributed, were key players in the financial crisis. And the authors worked for 3 years going to business schools in the US, seeing how people taught and how they could teach differently. And they came up with this very interesting report, which is called Rethinking Undergraduate Business Education. In there, they explore many different alternatives, some of them already put in place in different business schools. But one of their key ideas was multiple framing, and that could help us in this idea of critical thinking. This echoes, we talked previously about John Mingers and a paper about what does it mean to be critical. And he calls it the critique of objectivity. And I'm quoting him here. He says that students have to see that even seemingly objective facts, such as quantitative data, do not simply occur, but are the result of particular processes involving a whole variety of people, operations, and decisions/choices. To what extent are particular interest groups able to promote or suppress certain information or shape the agendas of discussions and meetings? So the critique, and here it relates to this idea of acknowledging politics. It's the idea that there are always a variety of people that are engaged within any kind of complex situation. And that's the idea that echoes the idea of multiple framing by the Carnegie report, which is, and I'm quoting Colby and colleagues here in the book, they say that multiple framing is the ability to work intellectually with fundamentally different, sometimes mutually incompatible analytical perspectives. So it's a mode of thoughts where you are able to perceive the contradictions and deal with the inconsistencies between the way that different people see the complex situation. So in an uncertain and ambiguous environment, the tools that we use, the following analytical abstract thinking, are often not necessarily useless, but very limited to find a solution or even an understanding. So when you have a question that is ambiguous, that is ambivalent, that is subjective, that is complex, that is uncertain, applying a SWOT analysis or a 4Ps or a pastel or one of my favorite tools to hate, the Maslow's pyramids. These tools don't really work anymore because they are too simplistic to capture real life situations. And here I'm quoting the authors of the report again, for some kinds of problem, there are several frames through which one might make sense of the issues, each of which makes different starting assumption and therefore appropriately takes different considerations into account. So some situations are so complex that they require to multiply the angles of analysis. It's not about finding the right tool for the right situation and then using the right tool the right way. It's about seeing that you have multiple tools that can be applied and that they have to enrich your vision of the situation. And you'll find that in complex situation, in real life situation, very often the tools of analytical thinking are useless, and being able to see the multiple frames of the situation becomes indispensable. As they say in the report, teaching multiple framing involves helping students learn that any particular way of framing the issues is contingent in some sense, and they would come to recognize the nature of that contingency in relation to history, culture, ideology, etc. Frameworks and definitions of problems are always created by people, not given in nature. So any problem that you face, any issue, any case, any situation, and the decisions that you have to make come from a certain point of view. And the richer your points of view that you take into account, the number of points of view, the richer your ability to make the right decision or to avoid a catastrophic one. I'll give you, and we'll engage with a few examples, but having blind spots, forgetting some perspective on a situation could lead you to jump to make a decision that has catastrophic repercussion because you didn't think about it in an open enough view. So here, looking at politics, as we said before, not in the sense of professional politicians, but in the sense of what are the assumptions, the values, the ethics, the power plays behind a tool or a decision is absolutely key. Looking at history as well, where does that situation come from? What was the history behind the tools and the techniques that we are using? What were the alternatives? How do they do it in different countries, different cultures, different places? Is going to enrich the frames that you are able to put upon a situation. And it's all the more important that, for example, we know now that most of what we call strategy at the top of any company, even a small one, requires to engage with what is called wicked problem. A wicked problem is a problem that is so complex that it doesn't have a solution anymore. A quick definition would be to say that a wicked problem is a problem that is highly complex, highly uncertain, and you have a high level of value divergence, meaning that the different actors and stakeholders around it disagree profoundly of what the situation is and what it requires. The classic example of a wicked problem is, for example, global warming. If you take global warming, it's very difficult to tell which variables are important. It's highly complex. That's a high number of variables and they're interrelated together. It's highly uncertain. It's very complex to say how it's going to unfold and what's going to happen with global warming. And you have a high level of value divergence. If you ask Donald Trump about global warming, you don't have the same answer than if you asked Greta Thunberg. And if you ask the question of global warming in Japan, you don't have the same answers as in Poland. So we have a high level of divergence around the problem. But how do you deal with doubts and how do you engage with it is absolutely key, because in the face of a wicked problem, trial and error doesn't work anymore. You need to find a way to cope with it that is highly complex. We now have quite a few theories that show us that the work of strategists, the work of strategizing at the top of a company is very much about finding ways to engage with wicked problems. And I'll share the reference with you if you want to go further into that. So all of that to show you that a critical thinker is not someone that is attacking with criticism a person, a position, or a situation. A critical thinker is someone who's able to open his or her mind to the many different ways that a situation can be understood, and therefore how to engage with it, whether it's a solution or an action, an activity, a plan, a strategy. So that means that, contrary to popular thinking, a critical thinker is someone who's open-minded. It means that you are able to see the world through the point of view of the different stakeholders, different actors that are around the table considering that issue. It doesn't mean that you're agreeing to everyone. You're not trying to make friends with everyone, but you are able to understand how they see the situation, and it enriches your understanding of the situation. So it doesn't mean that you make an average of everyone's position, and it doesn't mean that you're agreeing with everyone, but it means that you have considered all of their points of view in order to understand to inform your point of view and to understand the situation better. It's quite difficult because more and more in Western societies, we have this polarization, like we avoid with any wicked problem and situation on TV, we invite people on one side of the set, people on the other side, and they yell at each other. No one listens to anyone else, at the end of which we only agree with the people we agreed at the beginning. We have not been made smarter. And what we know now is that through YouTube and social media, we could have access to a lot of different points of view, but we tend to engage with the content that we already agree with, and social media and YouTube and their algorithm tends to push content that we either agree with or are going to reject with in order to increase engagement. As a result, it builds what has been called cognitive bubbles, in which, despite the fact that we have access to so much diversity, we tend to be more and more narrow-minded. So a critical thinker is going to go on YouTube and is going to go on social media to find people who are highly disagreeing with him or her, in order to understand their point of view and to become smarter, not in order to be more narrow-minded. It's about being open-minded in the analysis in order to find a position. This is why I regularly, personally watch the videos of Jordan Peterson, who I hate profoundly, and in France, regularly listen to the radio show of Alain Finkielkraut, a highly conservative person who I despise profoundly in most of his position. But I listen to it regularly because disagreeing with them makes me smarter. It's not about just listening and saying, what a bunch of idiots. It's about listening to them because they are smart. And therefore, in order to disagree with them, I have to be even smarter. So critical thinking is not about rejecting positions for ideological reason. It's about engaging with them to try to open your mind and enrich your perspective. Let's take a quick example in recent events, just to show you the difficulty of that.